Well, hello and welcome to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back with more news, tech content and wisdom from the world of marketing. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, a man on a mission to keep marketing simple, the voice of the Marketing and Finance Podcast and the host of the Roger Log video series. I give you Monsieur Roger Edwards.
Oh, hello, and thank you so much, everybody, for tuning into this week's show. And as always, I'm also joined by a man who is also on a mission to demystify digital marketing. He's the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast series. Here is Mr. Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to you, viewers and listeners, for your wonderful support. And Roger, today I'd like to give a little shout out to a new YouTube subscriber. Jennifer Burt, who's the Senior Marketing Manager at iPipeline UK, recently joined and subscribed to the channel on YouTube. So a big thank you to you, Jennifer, and for all the others as well. But on occasion, people had a bit more of a pseudonym, so I didn't know who it was. It was just one of those obscure names that sometimes you can find on the interweb. But also, if we have any new subscribers to the podcast, we can't obviously find out who you are. So do drop a quick hello on the social media accounts, as well as to Roger and Pascal's email addresses. So always lovely to have people listening and giving us their support. Would you agree?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So thanks for subscribing, Jenny. Good to see you here. Good to see you here.
Super. So this is episode 27, Roger. We've got 6 segments to go through. We hope that the tech is going to be on our side so we don't lose any footage. So let's begin with In the News.
According to eMarketer, 38% of marketers are planning to boost podcast spend in 2021, with 1 in 5 digital US radio ad dollars predicted to go towards podcasts.
Well, Google recently announced they are making good progress towards removing third-party cookies from its Chrome browser amid growing concerns about privacy.
YouTube is looking to add Twitch-styled looping video clips so fans can share the most popular moments of their favourite online gamers and streamers.
Microsoft has more than 200 million users of its education products, with over 100 million students using Microsoft Teams for collaboration and face-to-face learning.
Clubhouse, currently valued around $1 billion and with over 2 million users, wants creators to earn revenue through subscriptions, ticketed events, and receiving tips from listeners.
Spotify has patented an intriguing mood-detecting tech that can suggest new content based on your tone of voice, emotional state, gender, age, or accent.
Crikey. Following Twitter's recent acquisition of email marketing platform Review, Facebook has announced a set of newsletter tools for journalists and writers.
Well, Roger, some big tech news this week, interestingly. I will ask you in a moment about Clubhouse, because I know you're one of the 2 million users around the world. But can we start with Spotify that can detect your mood or your accent and suggest new content? So am I going to be condemned to listen to Joe the Taxi forever now on Spotify?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, that was my first sort of thought there was Spotify would detect that you were feeling a little bit melancholy and put some heavy metal on, or if it felt you were a little bit too upbeat, you might find you were being subjected to Ibiza-style chill-out trance music or something like that. But I mean, it's not a bad idea. It's an interesting idea, but do we really need tech to decide what sort of mood we're in and give us the right stuff to suit that mood? Are we not taking too much of our human decision-making ability and our human emotional capacities away with all of these detecting techs? I don't know. Is this a step too far?
It's interesting because, you read last week or the week before the Fitbit, obviously, advancement in controlling your, kind of blood pressures and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's all right to be tracked so we get good advice and maybe point in the right direction. But I don't know. I mean, are we going to get a situation where my phone can detect an argument between me and my wife and start to play, classical music to calm everything down? And I think it's also down to where is the data going? I mean, we read about the cookies on browsers and so on. So are they going to keep historical data so they'll be able to report back to you, Roger? Interestingly, Monsieur Edwards, every Sunday morning you feel a little low. We've noticed that. So here's our recommended playlist.
Yeah, and again, if it detects you having an argument with your wife, does it dial up the Interflora page and automatically send some flowers? I don't know. It's a bizarre one. It's a bizarre. I don't know whether I want my gizmos interfering with my mood. If I feel that I need to chill out, I'm going to go and either have a bath with bath salts or put the aforementioned Ibiza trance music on, perhaps. Or if I'm feeling a little bit melancholy, maybe I will decide to put the heavy metal on. I'm not sure.
Yeah, viewers and listeners, let us know. Is that too far? Is it too intrusive? Or is it actually very helpful to you? Clubhouse.
Yeah, Clubhouse.
Right. So you've been a user. You've also been attending a few sessions. Is that obviously a natural progression for revenue to be part of the mix?
Yeah, I think this is the way that it's going to go. Now, it's interesting, Pascal. I did my own podcast on Clubhouse last week, and it was a little review of the app and whether I think that people should go on it. And my answer was always going to be, well, if that's where your customers are, then there is a good, strong case for you to be in there doing some content. I think this is quite a polarizing app. The more it's out there, the more I see people making fun of it on one side, and the more I see people absolutely raving about it on the other. And yesterday brought it home to me is that apparently they had Elon Musk in a room, and he, by all accounts, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people in there, and the usual combination of people wanting to get on stage just so that they could shout out, hey, I'm here and I'm with Elon. And that was when I'm thinking, do you know what? They could sell tickets for rooms like that with people like Elon Musk in there. And you could mean other people like Richard Branson, any big thought leaders. But the conclusion I've come to with Clubhouse is that the most value that I've got out of it so far from the interactions that I've had with it is the smaller rooms where you have a smaller number of people who are genuinely trying to help, generally sharing good ideas, insights, and not this sort of 5,000 people in a room trying to shout the loudest and say how they've built 8-figure businesses within a week without doing any work. And whilst I think you could sell tickets for Elon Musk style people, I'm not sure you could sell subscriptions to little rooms of 5 or 6 people sharing genuine insights. So I'm not sure how people like me, who like the smaller, more intimate part of Clubhouse, are actually going to be able to use it to monetize, if at all, going forward.
Oh, thanks very much for that. So as you know, and people who've been listening to the podcast know, I am an Android user. I did get an invitation yesterday, which was very flattering, but I had to explain that I had to turn it down. But there is a brand that is making a bit more noise called Stereo. Have you come across that yet? So
I've not heard of that.
It's not a fair way to say it, but a Clubhouse clone. I think they've done the things their own way. But again, it's obviously to be used on Android phones. So it's a similar model. So I might look into that Stereo, as in sound stereo. And I've seen podcasters and YouTubers using it to obviously interaction with their audiences.
I've heard of people going out and buying old iPads and iPod Touches just so they can get into Clubhouse.
It feels like people are just rushing headlong, and that's in the nature of being us, as people. Talking of rushing headalong, your take on the news that so much money is going to be spent on advertising on podcast, is that, again, a symptom of people just rushing into where they think is the next, kind of silver bullet?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I've looked at the statistics for my Marketing and Finance podcast, and I can actually see each lockdown in my podcast statistics. So back last March, the first time that the UK government said we had to stay at home, I saw the podcast levels go down a bit. Then when the actual lockdown came in, where we had to stay at home, definitely, it went down again. And then, of course, it got relaxed in the summer. The downloads went up. The second lockdown, downloads went down. And now as we've headed into this year, I've seen downloads been affected again, which absolutely convinces me that podcasts are mainly listened to by people who are commuting to work, or maybe people who are spending time running as exercise or stuff like that. Lockdown has interfered with commuting. It's also interfered with things like exercise because people have had to look after children, educate children at home. I think podcast listening time is down. Unless you're a marketer and you're in Clubhouse, it seems to have had no effect at all. But podcasting, it feels a little bit strange to me why there's so much emphasis on advertising on podcasts at a time when podcast downloads seem to be down. Maybe they're just hoping that once the pandemic eases and people start commuting again, that the numbers will shoot up and the revenue will be justified.
Do you know, you're making me realize that the same has happened to me. So I listen to podcast episodes and series through Stitcher. And I've got favorites, and I've got favorites organized in different kind of groups, fun as well as business and so on. And I realized that I'm only listening to a handful of the episodes now, of all the favorites, if you like, compared to when I used to travel, be in a car, be in hotels and so on. So I think it's very, very telling. Very quickly, just to wrap up on in the news, your reaction to email marketing becoming a feature of either Twitter and Facebook. Are you interested? Are you actually curious to what it can mean to you and how you might engage your audience?
Again, I don't mind this, Pascal, but we've got to be careful of content blight, haven't we? Content overload. I can't remember who it was that coined that term. It's all very well, all of these platforms allowing you to bombard potential customers with communications, but there will become a time when those people will get fed up with it. They'll either hit the unsubscribe button, whether it's an unsubscribe button on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. So yes, do it, but as marketers, we've got to make sure that we're not enraging our customers, and that means using it in an engaging way and not just bombarding people with more stuff that they don't want.
Yeah, I would agree. And for me, the one that actually was most interested in is Twitter, because I have found that sometimes I have some announcements or some information to share, and I know that this is most relevant to a small group within my Twitter following, and I wish I could just send it to them. And I know that you could organize people into Twitter lists. I think, is that where it may go? Where if it's a more localized news or news about a core topic that for a fact is only of interest to a smaller segment of your audience, could you actually say, I just want those people to see, the announcements on Twitter? So, well, listen, it's been fascinating to get this kind of almost big tech news on this occasion. But let's move on to the content spotlights. So this is by far my favorite segment. Roger and I surprise each other with a discovery from the interweb, an article, a webinar, a podcast, indeed a video, and we react and review it together. So Roger, what have you got for us this week?
Okay, Pascal, this is an article which appears in the website eConsultancy, and the heading of the article is 7 Retailers Who Digitally Transformed by Doing What Customers Love Online.
Right.
And it's I often pass by articles that are about retailers because working with supermarkets and fast-moving consumer goods brands is not really what I've done throughout my life. But I did get caught by the visuals and by the headline on this article and thought that I would have a read of it. And in reality, it's an incredibly fascinating article, and I could in fact read most of it out to you here, but I won't because I want you to actually go and read it. So as it says in the headline, they do mini case studies of 7 retailers. Now I'm talking people like Aldi here and Selfridges. And look at how they have tried to transform their physical shop type in real life experience, and how they've tried to put that into an online world, especially because of the pandemic and the varying levels of success that they've had. And then after they've gone through the 7 case studies, they just come up with a summary which says these are the sort of things that you should be looking at if you are going to do a similar sort of exercise, i.e. take your physical offering and try to make it more aligned with the online world. And it is quite fascinating because, again, we've seen so many people have to pivot, and every time I say pivot, Pascal, in this podcast, I always have to caveat it by saying I don't like the word pivot, but pivot we've had to. And there's a difference perhaps in pivoting a fitness business from real life to online compared to being a marketing consultant or a speaker pivoting from online. But if you are a brand which so absolutely depends upon the ability to let people walk in through your doors and rummage around on your shelves, or take clothes down off hangers and try them on, it's a much more difficult thing to do to transform that into an online experience. But is so interesting to see what they've done. So what I was going to do, if that's okay, is to very, very quickly look at 2 of them rather than all 7, and then very quickly tell you what those summary strategy type of approaches people would have to do. So the first one is Aldi, which is the budget grocery brand. Now, I have to say Aldi is not my favourite store. I perhaps don't like the fact that it's a budget grocery brand, but actually reading this article, I've probably realised what it is I don't like about Aldi. But that's not to say that other people do like it. But Aldi actually describe themselves as almost like a bargain hunter's treasure hunt. They deliberately lay their store out in a sort of haphazard way. So you might be searching along the aisle looking for a cauliflower, or searching along the aisle looking for a tin of spaghetti, and you might come across a pair of pink trainers for no reason other than there's a pair of, and you think, oh, I need a pair of pink trainers, so you go and buy it. Now, to me, that it just looks like it. I don't understand what is this pair of pink trainers do there, but it's deliberate, and it creates impulse buys amongst people going into Aldi. So ostensibly, people are going in to save money on their groceries, but at the same time, they're almost being, not scammed isn't the right word, but it's almost like a bait and switch, isn't it? You go in there looking for a cauliflower, you come out with pink trainers. Now, what they've done with their online offering over the last 6 months is to replicate that sort of haphazard randomness that you get in the store, and they've done that online. Now, arguably that translates into quite a messy website as well, but whether or not you like it, it is a good example of how that one brand has managed to create an online version of what appeals to some of its customers. So I did think that while it's not my cup of tea, hats off to them for actually replicating the same sort of approach. And the second one was Selfridges. And Selfridges have several big stores. The most iconic one is on Oxford Street in London. And they are absolutely renowned, especially at Christmas time, for their big shop displays in the windows. People, it's almost like a theatrical production in some cases, and people look forward to the Selfridges window displays almost as much as they look forward to John Lewis's Christmas advert and that sort of thing. And again, they have taken that concept online and come up with a whole range of virtual, almost like window experiences. But again, some of them look like online plays, some of them look like online experiences. And again, I think that it's quite clever the way that they've done that. Now, I won't go through the other brands, but we're talking about people like Pandora, we're talking about Clark's, and Argos is in there as well, Joules, H&M. But the article really just summarised by saying that, and there's nothing in here that will surprise us. It's all about researching the customer's experience and homing in on what the customers like about your in real life brand and what they would tolerate, what they would like to see transformed into an online equivalent, and whether that will actually help them purchase. And you could argue that in the Aldi example it will do, because it replicates that whole treasure hunt thing, or whether it's actually going to put them off, or whether it's not relevant. And so, again, it's just saying research, effectively scorecard the potential results, convince yourself that doing the online equivalent will be engaging and will get people to come through your virtual doors. And then, of course, you've got to go and convince the board to actually implement it. So a little bit different this week. Quite a long article. It's going to take you, a good time to read it, because each of the case studies is relatively detailed. But as I'm not really a retail expert, I did find it incredibly fascinating.
No, I would agree. And for me, there's so much we can learn from B2C because of the pressures and demand that they have to go through. I'm actually quite fond of Aldi, particularly the bakery section, Roger. They've got the French baguette just right for me. So I always like to go there and get also my croissant and pain au chocolat. But what I loved about this article is a reminder that the inspiration for the online experience is a real life experience. So I love the way the two examples you've chosen, have literally look at what is it that works for us, what do we stand for, what would it be like to visit the store for real if people could, and what is the closest we can get to that experience using the internet and web pages and content. Because too often, you and I have been in a situation with clients where the conversation is pretty much, this is what the website features is on the wish list, if you like. People look at what is possible, and they go ahead charmed by the technology, and in a process completely deviate and move away from what they stand for and their own values. And I've seen situation even with the infamous CRM systems, where that took over customer service, and in a way we end up in a situation where the computer says no situation, as opposed to providing a wonderful experience.
Absolutely right. And and you've said there, you like your baguettes, you like your croissants. However well they replicate the online experience, you're still not going to be able to smell that freshly baked bread online. So they can only take it so far. But from what we read in this article, it has been working.
No, absolutely. And I would always recommend for people to pay attention to those kind of customer-facing industries, because they are under immense pressure, and usually they are at the most creative. Indeed, many of in the news section that we read, you and I, are often from the retail world. Shall I tell you what I found this week, Roger?
Do please tell me what you found, Pascal.
So this is a free resource, which is, I think, not the first time I've used something like this for the Content Spotlight, a free resource from Twitter, from their business division. Now, I want to preface this description with the fact that I have found over the years that any kind of free resources from the big brands, whether they are from Facebook, Google, Twitter, and all the others, have been really poor. Either so superficial that frankly of no use to anyone, or so complex and boring that in fact they're very unappealing. And I have to say that the official Twitter 2021 planner is a success, Roger. And I'm taking away all the criticism. I'm taking back all the criticism from previous years about those platforms. So what they have produced is a fantastic, easy-to-use planner. It's a PDF document that you can type in yourself. So they have boxes and fields. But let me take you through my experience. So first I get an email from Twitter UK saying we have this amazing resource. My reaction was, no, you do not. But I kind of follow the link. So you go to a landing page which is quite unassuming, not particularly salesy or shouty. In fact, I would argue that they could do a better job to really sell the resource. And then there's a big button, download now. And when I click on download now, I was expecting to fill a form and giving away pretty much all my life secrets. And no, you get the resource just by clicking download now, Roger. So the form is gone, which I think is very telling of the times and the conversation with you and I've had about, putting barriers to accessing the document. So I've got a PDF, which I download. Second surprise, after the fact there was no form, this document is 108 pages long.
Wow.
Now, typically, I'm sure you'd agree, most online resources for free are very light. very superficial, sometimes very succinct, because of course they want to upsell, cross-sell. But this is the full version. This is very comprehensive. And let me describe to you very quickly what's inside the 2021 planner, the official planner from Twitter. So to begin with, they have a bit of a getting started section where they invite you to reflect on a number of things, including, for example, your guidelines. What is the kind of copy, the kind of media, or even emojis that is right for you, but also what is out, so the exclusion, as we would call them. The other thing they want you to do is to maybe reconnect with your Twitter voice. So they have a number of questions they want you to go through, from personas to audience reactions and so on and so forth. And this is actually quite a fun questionnaire to go through. So they kind of want you to reconnect with the way you want to be perceived this year. Then, of course, at the heart of it is your monthly planner. Now, the reason why this document is so long is because they have broken down the year in 2 weeks. So each month of the year has 4 pages, and you have boxes from Monday to Sunday where you can actually enter a draft version of your tweets. But also alongside those kind of weekly pages, you have boxes like, well, what are your goals? What are your results? What do you want to do? What are the ideas you have? So you have not just a planning tool, but also a reflection tool. And again, very easy to use, very elegantly designed, and you just have to click your cursor into the boxes and you do that. What is nice is that at the start of each month, they want you to plan and reflect. So they want to say, well, what is it you want to achieve this month and what does results look like? But at the end of each quarter, they have a review page where they want you to write down what's worked, what did not work as so well, and anything you've learned that you want to carry over to the next quarter. And that takes you till December 2021. At the end of this planner, you have a helpful resources section, which is actually quite interesting. They have what they called a month of tweets. So they've taken a typical month, 30, 31 days, and each day they have essentially given an example of what the tweet could be, from a behind-the-scene photography to a poll to an extract from a book to a quote and so on and so forth. So it's a lovely way to get the imagination going. The other thing that they have done, which I used to in my younger days as a trainer, they have a tweet template. So think of them as boxes with the outline of a typical tweet, and you can doodle and sketch to your heart's content, which I think is very, very helpful. They also have suggestions for typical polls you can do on Twitter. And importantly, they have 12 video ideas. Part of the document suggests that video is very important. The top 5 or the 12 video ideas are how-to videos, Q&A videos, live videos, of course, animation, and product guides. And then you have the others as well. And they conclude these helpful resources with the Twitter ads guide, which is to be expected. But as far as free resources go for big brands, this one so far is a winner for me this year.
Wow. I mean, I never even knew this thing existed, Pascal. And I do know that these planners are pretty big business, aren't they? I mean, at least a couple of people we know, Janet Murray being one, have actually built businesses selling actual physical paper or big planners in the form of coffee table style books, and they're very, very popular, and they do all of the things that you've said but in physical form. Interesting, again, we were talking about people with physical products moving them online. There's an example of something which I've always viewed to be a physical thing, a coffee table size planning book, and now here's Twitter taken that idea and translated it into something online. But what's great about this is not only do you get the planning aspect of it, but they've also taken out the legwork from some of the creative stuff as well, haven't they? Giving you the tweet thought starters and a month of tweet themes to inspire new content and all of that sort of thing. And I imagine you could become quite immersed in this and actually improve your Twitter feed and the engagement that you give your followers and people you interact with even more by using this planner.
Absolutely. And I thought this could be a wonderful resource for a team, exercise. You could do it online, but of course say, let's open the page with the tweet template and let's sketch and doodle, or let's look at the month of tweet and what do we like or dislike. So you could animate conversation within a team, as a client, actually, as a consultant, who's because this plan, in a way, is, and the way in which they want you to reflect is right for Facebook, LinkedIn, and all the others. But I think credit's where credit's due. I just thought, for once, a brand like Twitter, I put the work in, and it's worked, and it's just a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to download it and have a proper look at it myself.
Well, talking of pleasant surprises, shall we move on to marketing tech and apps?
Let's do that.
And in this segment, Roger and I like to surprise you with new techs and apps that can make life easier as a content creator. So Roger, what have you got for us this week?
Pascal, quite a while ago on the show, I was looking at live video streaming software, and I talked about a piece of technology called OBS. And OBS is remarkably good, and it's also free. But one of the downsides that a lot of people acknowledge about OBS is that it is actually quite complicated to get to learn. I actually heard one person describe it as a box full of wires, and unless you know where the wires fit, it can actually be very difficult to actually get to use it. But the fact that it is absolutely free, and it can do pretty much everything from stream in 4K to allow you to use green screen to overlay all of that sort of thing. It does fine, but as I said, it can be quite complicated. So over the last few weeks, I've been having a few conversations with a few online event providers and producers, and I've just been thinking, how can I up my game visually if I get asked to do any more speeches? And I did come to the conclusion that I did need something which might allow me to have more than one camera, for example. So I could have one camera, say, from a different angle. So just to mix it up a bit for the people who are watching. And it's very hard to do these sorts of things in OBS unless you know what you're doing. So I thought I would have a look and see if there are any paid versions out there of similar sorts of software which I could experiment with. Most of these things have trial periods, of course. Now, there are some extremely expensive, well, maybe not extremely expensive, but things like Wirecast, you're talking about $750 for a 1 year license plus upgrades. So that's quite a lot of money for somebody to drop. We've also talked about on the show things like StreamYard and Restream, which are browser based and are very, very good. I'm not taking that away from them, but some of the flexibility that you might want doesn't exist. So the couple of alternatives to OBS that I found were called vMix and VidBlaster. Now, actually, they look pretty similar, and I could be accused of actually just picking two pieces of software and when I could actually have picked one. But there is a reason for having both. First of all, they both do the job of OBS, but their interfaces are so much more easy to use. It's more of a drag and drop type of approach, lots of icons that you can use of colours and that sort of thing. And I do think that both of these, it's extremely easy to set things up. Both of them have a very interesting pricing structure in that they describe each of the elements that you could have on the screen at the moment as either a module or an output. So one camera would be one output, for example, or one module. And depending upon how much you want to pay each month, it usually depends upon how many modules you want to use. So you can get VidBlaster for as little as $6 a year. But that only actually gives you, I think it's 4 modules. So you could have one camera, one microphone, one overlay, and something else, and that would be it for your $6. Or it goes up to about $600, and you can have literally as much as you want. Similarly, vMix operates on a similar sort of example. I think their cheapest version is $60, and if you want 4K unlimited modules, it's about $1,000. So quite a range of prices. I really do love the interface of these two things. The reason I picked VidBlaster is that they do something that I haven't come across with anybody else. Now, I don't know how much live streaming our listeners have done, but one of the problems I do find, and this seems to be across all platforms, the browser-based ones or the software-based ones, is that sometimes you can get a lag between the video picture and the audio. So that means that the people's mouths are out of sync with their dialogue. And I don't know about you, Pascal, but that really annoys me when I'm watching something and the dialogue and the audio is out of sync. It sometimes happens on Sky TV when I'm watching a film, and it just drives me mad. But a lot of these software solutions have built-in settings where you can say, well, there's obviously a lag behind the audio, so I can actually increase the delay on the video to try and sync them back up again. But what VidBlaster does is it actually has some intuitive software that does the test for you and actually comes up with the best delay to eliminate the lag, whereas all the other ones, OBS included, you effectively have to try, well, I'll try 80 milliseconds first and then I'll try 85 milliseconds, and by the time you've ironed it out to the nearest millisecond, you're losing the will to live, whereas VidBlaster does it for you, and from what I can see, it works pretty well. But do you know what? The conclusion that I've come to after looking at these and thinking, I couldn't really do with just the 2 or 3 modules. I'd still have to buy the software that was probably within the several $100 ballpark. I have actually come to the conclusion that the power of OBS, even though it's a little bit clunky, for what you get for free, actually, to my mind at the moment, is better than stumping up for some of these ones with a better interface.
But your comment about looking at ways to step up your game, looking at ways to provide a better service to your customers is exactly what is required. To be curious, to do the research, to come to a conclusion. And indeed, there will be scenarios or instances where actually vMix or VidBlaster will be the right solution, and it can be incorporated in terms of what you do. And that's one of the reasons I love this marketing tech and apps, because 2 things, Roger. It helps me remember all the things I've forgotten about or buried in the recess of my mind, but also it allows me to have conversation with my customers about what have you thought of. So I think the fact that you've gone full circle is part of what one has to do as a content marketer and a marketer, looking at solutions, looking at features, benefits, and so on, and reaching, obviously, a decision. So thanks very much for that. And I will certainly look into them, because I'd forgotten about vMix, more to my point, and I didn't know about the second one. But once again, this has been a meeting of minds because I was inspired by a conversation about upping games. So I'm currently working with a few clients on their next virtual conferences. They kindly invited me to host those conferences. So there's a lot of work that goes on, all too well, Roger. And the conversations, of course, about last year's lessons. And one of the lessons, Roger, has been about inviting speakers to deliver an online session is very different to them being on stage. And we've had some issues in the past. I mean, this really is a lessons learned as opposed to a criticism. We've had some issues around the quality of the slide deck and, of course, how it fitted the overall branding and style of the event. So we're looking at ways for slide decks to marry up to the overall branding. But it's hard. It's hard to do. What do? Do you send a PowerPoint template? That doesn't work. You can't necessarily just get things off Canva. That's a bit clunky. So I was reminded of a solution by a good friend of the show, Victoria Fleming, which you will know. And she's been using a platform called beautiful.ai. I don't know if you've heard of that one before, Roger.
No, I've not heard of this one.
Okay, so this is essentially, as the name or the indicative .ai is powered by AI, where you can choose from many, many templates that they have available to you. But the moment you move an image, or the moment you insert an image, then the other elements of the slide move around to make space and accommodate how you want to display the information, which is really allowing you to work much, much faster. So think about using PowerPoint. If you put an image and it's over the text is hidden from view. Then on beautiful.ai, you'll be able to see the text removing itself or creating a second column or something like this. So as to say, the slides will adapt like magic. So it allows you to have a template that others can follow, but they can still have their own style based on the content, words, images, and videos that they do. So beautiful.ai is one option. The second option that I remembered as a result of learning about beautiful.ai is emaze.com. And the reason why I like them is that, again, to be a bit different and moving away from maybe what Canva can give you and other templates, they have very unique sets of 2D and 3D templates that can really allow you to create some great arresting visuals when you want to deliver, particularly, I would say, keynote presentations or one which is more motivational in nature as opposed to instructions. So again, part of our role in 2021, it cannot be the same experience as last year for attendees as well as organizers and our clients. So looking both at streaming service but also slide deck design services is part of what we need to be doing.
People are not going to believe that we don't collaborate on these elements of the show in advance, because, and you're going to be quite shocked when I get to my creator shout out later, and I'm actually going to reserve too much comment on what you've just talked now, because some of the stuff that I've got coming up in creator content also applies to this. But yeah, again, I wasn't aware of Beautiful AI. I've heard of emaze before, and this is just so good. It means that we can always, as you say, be looking to up our game, and working with so many event producers these days just makes me wonder that. And I think last week we had that great piece of content that you talked us through about how webinars, you just have to break the webinar model. You know, that resonated with me so much. And that's probably what made me have a look at the vMix and VidBlaster. But yeah, these are the sort of things that we should be testing day in, day out to make sure that we stand out.
Absolutely. And you know, all that marketing tech and apps, just to give me a link, is possible nowadays thanks to visionaries and pioneers of the past, which means that it's time for This Week in History.
In 1895, the Lumiere brothers patent one of the earliest film projectors, the cinematograph, which also served as a film camera, a developer, becoming the first all-in-one device.
While in 1928, Australian aviator and inventor Bert Hinkler becomes the first person to fly solo from Croydon in England to Darwin in Australia, breaking the time record from 28 days, Roger, to just under 15.5 days.
In 1946, ENIAC, the first fully electronic and digital computer, is unveiled at the University of Pennsylvania. First used by the US Army, ENIAC could calculate in 30 seconds what took a human 20 hours.
Well, in 1968, Planet of the Apes, starring Charlton Heston and Roddy McDowall, premieres in New York. The film is based on the 1963 novel from French author Pierre Boulle, who also wrote The Bridge over the River Kwai.
In 1972, a small crowd is introduced to iconic spaceman Ziggy Stardust during a concert at London's Toby Jug pub. 6 months later, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars is released.
Wow, well, in 1977, Cash, the Chicago area computer-based exchange, is launched by Ward Christensen and Randy Suess to allow them and other computer fanatics to share information between each other.
In 1996, world chess champion Garry Kasparov loses a game to the computer Deep Blue. Kasparov went on to defeat Deep Blue 4-2 during this match. However, he lost to Deep Blue during a rematch a year later.
And finally, in 2005, Google Maps is released to the public for the first time, and we've never had to ask for directions ever again. The original program was created by Where To Technologies and was acquired by Google in October 2004.
Wow.
What a
Google
set.
Maps.
Yes. It's hard to remember a time without it. There were, obviously, we used to have to use road maps and sometimes get lost a lot, but what an invention, right?
It's funny, I can remember the first time we ever saw the Google Maps van with its gizmo on top that takes all the 3D photographs. We were actually backing out of our driveway in our car, and my son was looking out of the window at the back. And almost like, oh, look, there's the Google Maps car. And literally, of course, when they eventually uploaded our street to Google Maps, there was our car partially reversing out of the driveway. And my son had been pixelated, obviously, in the shot. But that was just a really surreal moment when you realise just how absolutely detailed the whole thing was.
I'm very fond of Google Maps as a product and Google My Business, as we mentioned before. I just look forward to also when they do release the social network version, which has been in the making for many, many years. But can I ask you, can you imagine in 1977 the excitement of actually going to a forum and chatting with others via an early version of the internet? I mean, 1977, Cash, it was essentially the early version of forums and discussion boards.
I mean, I took part in loads of the early versions of discussion boards in the 90s. I remember being on a roller coaster discussion board. I've frequently and still am on a discussion board called Flyer Talk, which over the years has made it possible for me to fly on quite a few holidays in some very nice and posh seats simply by learning the tricks and trades of frequent flyer miles. Of course, none of that seems to apply in the pandemic. But yeah, you don't really get that many. I guess they're still there. It's just that I don't frequent them anymore. But internet forums were one of the original sources of in-depth knowledge on specific subjects.
Oh, it's only in the 90s. That's what, I would spend most of that time because there was nothing else to go. The social networks didn't exist then. I remember actually, the defeat of Kasparov, by the computer, making the news and being quite shocked. But that shock felt in comparison to the shock of the last scene of Planet of the Apes. Do you remember the very first movie when he's on the beach and he discovers what's happened?
That has got to be one of the best movie cliffhangers of all time. I mean, that realization when he sees what he sees on the beach is just, it knocks you for six. I mean, you can't ever watch that for the first time after you've watched it, if you know what I mean. And it will never, ever have the same amazingly sort of gobsmackingly brilliant impact upon you as it does. But even if you do go back and watch it again later, it still has that ability to make you think, wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
I mean, I saw this on French TV with my family, and I think my dad played the game of not telling me. You must have known what the ending was like. So I'm watching. I'm in my early teens, maybe. And then that scene, I remember the sense of dread and turning around to my dad with my eyes wide open saying, please explain, but please don't explain because I'm very scared of what I'm seeing here,
Absolutely. And what I didn't know until today, Pascal, is that Pierre Boulle, who wrote Bridge on the River Kwai, actually wrote Planet of the Apes as well.
Right. Now, I knew the former. I didn't know they wrote Bridge on the River Kwai. Obviously, Planet of the Apes had sequels in terms of movies, TV series, and the likes, remakes, some better than others, shall we say. But, am I right in thinking that at the time, we're going to be careful not to turn this into film marketing, but it won plenty of awards for the special effects and the storytelling and that kind of things, and made Roddy McDowall a superstar as well.
Absolutely right. I mean, I've got lots of fond memories of the films Planet of the Apes, but I actually remember, I think I saw the TV series around the same time as well. Now, that did have Roddy McDowall in it as well, but the rest of the characters were played by other actors, and I remember there was the big gorilla was called Urko in the TV series as opposed to whatever he was called in the films, and there was also a comic as well. A Marvel comic came out around the same time about Planet of the
That's
Apes.
right, yeah.
And just like they did with Star Wars, the first 12 episodes of the comic were effectively a replay of the film.
Absolutely. Just a thought, the fact that you and I are able to produce this video podcast, we've got to thank two sets of people. Firstly, the Lumiere brothers, potentially, because somehow
Yep.
the cinematograph became the webcams and more, but also ENIAC, 1946, which has been featured in other parts of the history. I didn't know until I did the research, but the 15th of February every year is ENIAC Day. Essentially the first computer day, and around the world, although I can't say that I've taken part, but around the world people do celebrate the 15th of February as first computer day with all sort of different celebrations, but perhaps we should do something ourselves.
Well, the day after Valentine's Day. So, yeah, well, what I'd be very interested is what is it that takes a human 20 hours to do that ENIAC can do in 30 seconds? That's the question I would like answering.
It's incredible. I mean, again, the sense of excitement and the sense of wonder. Do you think we still have it nowadays? Yeah, I think so. I mean, we can be impressed and excited about new tech still to this day.
I think we possibly take things for granted a bit more today than we used to do.
Let me ask you very quickly, the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, is that the longest title ever for an album?
It certainly is a little bit pretentious, isn't it? Pascal, I have to admit that I've never really been a David Bowie fan. I don't mind the odd song, like Let's Dance is good, Major Tom is good, Ashes to Ashes is good, but I've never ever really enjoyed him enough to listen to a full album's worth, and I know that a lot of people are throwing rocks at me right now.
Yeah, I think Denise might be the first one as well, because she's a huge fan and very, very fond of that era of Ziggy Stardust as well. So I don't know, she might try and change your mind in some ways.
She can have a go.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much. What a pleasure it is to always go through this segment with you. But let's move on to our creators' shoutouts. And in this segment, Roger and I give content creators creating valuable content for their community a shout out. So, Roger, who's on the spotlight today?
Okay, Pascal, I've gone slightly outside of my usual close-knit group of network people, but we do know this guy, and we have interacted with him at conferences. This is Andrew Davis, quite a well-known keynote speaker across the world, and like all of us who do speaking for a living, he's had to embrace online technology to up his game. Now, I don't know whether you remember, Pascal, but back was probably last April, Andrew and Pete had to take their conference, Atomic, online. I
do remember.
And Andrew Davis did the keynote. Now, I think I remember at the time, all of us were pretty impressed that it wasn't a keynote in the sense of him just filming himself on a sort of pretend stage. He literally went out and made a film. Some of the scenes were outside in the garden, some of them were inside his home studio, some of them were walking down the street. It took a long time, and it really had an impact on me, and I know you and I have talked about it since, and I like to try and offer that sort of mix between live video and pre-recorded video in some of the events that I've been involved with, but it always stuck in the back of my mind. And then last week, your content shout out, content spotlight, was that whole argument that you've got to completely reinvent the webinar. In fact, you've got to break the webinar. And I came across, totally by accident, a 4-video series that Andrew Davis has done on YouTube, where he effectively says the same thing about online events in general. And he uses some of the examples that I've already said, a mix of live and a mix of pre-recorded, and using technology just to make your presentations online stand out from the pack. And I would encourage you to go and watch these, and we'll include the link to the videos in the show notes. But one of the things that really stuck out for me for what Andrew is saying is that whilst a lot of people like you and I, and like Andrew Davis himself, have embraced what he would describe as television technology, and we've already talked about using vMix and stuff like that, and mixing different camera angles and stuff like that. Whilst a lot of speakers have started to embrace more of this technology, ironically, quite a lot of TV productions and maybe even films have been taking a more amateur approach with their whole approach to filmmaking. So using more things like GoPros in filmmaking and drones and stuff like that. But the biggest thing that really hit it home to me again is this whole idea of don't try to replicate what would have been a 1 or 2 day offline in real person event. You can't be having 45-minute keynote speakers without anything changing, because you'll lose your audience's attention. So mix it up, create shorter segments. And one of the most important things that he says in this series is learn from people like Netflix. When you come to the end of a Netflix program and the titles start to run, it doesn't let you watch the titles, does it? It immediately says next episode starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and there you are, you're off watching the next episode. He says a lot of online events producers are making the mistake of having speech number 1 and then saying, now we're going to have a 5-minute break, come back once you've made your coffee and we'll have speaker number 2. And Andrew is saying, no, if you do that, they'll be off surfing the net or doing some other work or on a call to a client. You do the trick that Netflix do. As soon as one speaker is over, it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, bang, you're straight in there. And it really brings it back to the Protect X event that I was involved in producing last year. 7 speakers, each for 7 minutes, with no chance of moving on. It was just bang, 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 and the engagement levels were incredible.
No, super. Yeah, thanks very much. Do you know, as I was listening to you, I was thinking, yeah, but the thing is, Roger and I would be the nerds to actually stop the timer and actually watch the credits to know who was the AD or who was doing the music and so on. But I think you're right, this idea of pace and this idea of richness of content. So thank you for that. It's a great reminder, and I'm definitely going to be watching those videos. Appreciate it, Roger. So today, my spotlight, or the selection for this creator shout-out, is a gentleman called Graham Robb. Now, Graham is the owner of Recognition PR, and is also now the host of a brand new video and audio series called Business Unmuted. Now, I love new beginnings, Roger. I just go for it. It must be something very romantic on my side when it comes to content creation, but I just think that it's great to see more people doing something. But to your point, as you mentioned a moment ago, I love the way Graham has chosen his own format, and he's not necessarily following what others are doing. So to begin with, I think because of his vast knowledge and experience in PR, I think the way his approach is more like an investigation. I think there's a lot more journalism in his approach to video and podcast series than I've seen others do. So that's just from a format point of view. From a visual point of view, he's also gone for the news desk type layout, which I think is nice, and visually it's a bit different. So he himself is at the news desk, and he has guests who come on screen, and he's using all the different form of video interfaces. The other thing that is different for Graham, because of this need to investigate and prepare, is only going to record an episode every 3 weeks, and give himself time in between to do the research and invite the guests, but also time for promotion. So that's interesting, isn't it? Every 3 weeks, breaking the mold again. And what he wants to do, inviting people from local authority, government, and industry and business sectors. He wants to explore things like climate change, which was his very first episode, and talking about the forthcoming UN conference taking place in Glasgow at the end of this year. And next, he's going to be talking about the digital economy. So some kind of hard-hitting, in-depth discussions in and around what he wants to do. If you watch the trailer on the YouTube channel, you'll know or learn through Graham that the reason why it's called Business Unmuted is because the number one phrase people have said all year round last year was, Graham, you're on mute. So as a play on words, a little jest to obviously the conditions we find ourselves in to be on video and forgetting to unmute ourselves, Business Unmuted is now the new video and podcast series from Graham Robb from Recognition PR, and no doubt you get a lot of support from his team behind the scenes as well.
I like the idea of the deeper dive as well.
Mm.
It's actually something that I've been pondering about quite a bit recently, Pascal. Again, because we are living in such a snackable world, and snackable has become a thing, hasn't it? And people like bite-sized chunks of information. I do sometimes wonder that we're becoming very, we're only scratching the surface of a lot of subjects. It's often you'll hear those startling statistics like, 70% of content will be video by 2021, which, I've been hearing at conferences forever. But it's very rare that somebody actually digs into the source of these statistics and actually looks at what's really going on. So I think it's interesting that somebody's decided to do that.
No, I think it's great. So no, once again, two wonderful inclusion to the creator shout outs. Now, Monsieur Edwards, could I ask you
Yes,
to grab your camera, a
I will.
roadmap, and the torch? It's time to make our way to film marketing.
Yes.
So, Roger, in 1999, the world came across some rather concerning news over the web and sometime in printed publications, which read as follows. In October of 1994, three student filmmakers disappeared in the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland, while shooting a documentary. A year later, their footage was found. And of course, we're going to talk about the Blair Witch Project.
Was this the first example of found footage filmmaking, Pascal? I wonder whether it was, but it is another of those iconic, just genre-inventing, breaking flashes of utter brilliance, isn't it? I mean, I'm surprised it's taken us so long to get this one into the podcast, because actually I always thought at the time that the marketing for this was brilliant. And of course, I was at a lot earlier stage in my marketing career at that time, so perhaps wasn't as appreciative of marketing brilliance as I am now, nearly 20 years, more than 20 years later. But the way that they built up the anticipation for the film for months and months in advance of its actual launch, even to the going to the extent of creating a documentary about the characters in the film. I mean, in reality, that documentary was part of the film, wasn't it? You almost had to have watched it before you went to see the film. But that on its own, I remember thinking at the time, wow, you've actually made a documentary about fictional characters in order to sell a film about those fictional characters. I just remember thinking, this is such genius. You just can't not go and see the film to find out what it's all about.
You're absolutely right. And that's what it felt like. It was a genius in terms of indie filmmaking. I mean, ultimately, the life of a content marketer will mirror and echo the trials and tribulations of an indie filmmaker. Never enough time, never enough money, wish you had more resources, and yet you have to create content that's going to engage the audience. And then add on to that an ingenious marketing campaign, which frankly, by the time they got picked up by some of the big distributors, the job was done. I mean, I know that the big distributors will claim that they put lots of money, but by that time, it was working, and there was a growing audience for it. What is interesting, so this was released in October 1999, which is, I remember because it was a winter. I remember seeing this in a winter, which I think helped with the whole atmosphere watching this film. But of course, it'd been released early on in the year in the US. And that shows, again, this kind of indie filmmaking where sometimes it takes a long time to get the release and to get the momentum going compared to other blockbusters. But it is one of the most successful indie films of all time, and obviously made names like Eduardo Sanchez is now the go-to authority for indie filmmaking, together with his colleague Daniel Myrick. And you're right, the audacity of the marketing, the cheekiness, and sometimes the true guerrilla filmmaking of being borderline, not quite legal and moral, but hey, it still works. And people will find out at the end that it was all part of creating an experience which was beyond the film watching it, So going on the website, finding out that the documentary and so on, it was such a rich experience, but also for me was kind of thinking this was the year of the Matrix, Roger. This was the year of The World Is Not Enough. This was the year of Three Kings. I mean, big movies. Indeed, from the horror point of view, The Haunting, the remake of The Haunting, had been released and was not as successful as the Blair Witch Project, because I think the audience then wanted to make this a success for the creators as well.
Yeah, and I do find myself thinking that it was genuinely possible to go to the cinema and see the Blair Witch Project film without having immersed yourself in any of that pre-publicity, without having watched the fake documentary, without having been to the website. And it would still have been a standalone film, and you could enjoy it, and I'm sure it would have still scared the pants off people who watched it. But just think about how much more immersive and frightening it was knowing the backstory, having been wound up by the documentary and being intrigued by what was on the website. The two it almost, I did almost think that when I went to see it at the cinema, maybe they should have shown the documentary as well, then had an intermission, then shown the film. But then I decided, no. You come to the cinema to see the film itself, but you can't not watch and take part in all the preamble that goes with it.
And my memory of the film was oddly that it was filmed in such a way that, on one hand, if it'd been any other storyline, you think this is shocking filmmaking, this is terrible, but actually it was adding to the credibility or to the alleged stories. And I think you're right. Whilst I don't think historically it's the first found footage genre, it's reignited the interest. And then after that, we've had all sorts from blockbusters like Cloverfield and more. From a film production point of view, we now know that this was filmed in 8 days because that's all they could afford, literally, in terms of catering. And I think that's probably as much as the actors could put up with in terms of being left in a cold wood with half a script. And because what Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel did on occasion was creating surprises to have genuine reaction from the actors, which is borderline bullying, but of course we got the results for it, and of course the effort was into post-production, but they ended up with 20 hours of footage, and the agony, because you know that all too well, Roger, the agony to go from 20 to just 9.5 must have been something.
Yeah, and I do remember thinking that maybe the edit wasn't, I think it needed to have that found footage look, so it had to lots of cuts, almost very haphazard in nature. I do remember thinking maybe it wasn't quite as frightening as it deserved to be, and maybe that's because they made a lot of play, if I remember rightly, about sounds in the background, and maybe the sound of voices carrying through the woods, or the sound, I can't remember exactly what it was. But I do remember at the time thinking, I think they could have made more out of the sounds. They could have made it more frightening, because sometimes I couldn't actually hear what it was that they were supposedly frightened of. And again, some of the jump cuts were so severe that I sometimes didn't really know what was actually going on. But again, in hindsight, it was the nature of the beast. It was the nature of the film, and I think it was better for it. But there were a few times, oh goodness me, I just have no idea what's going on here.
It is certainly a film for people who have not seen it before. We'll have to watch it again, where you have to play along. You have to let yourself care about the story, because by the time we get to the final frame of the film, I was absolutely terrified because I'd allowed myself to be carried by the story. As we left the cinema, I could hear people saying that was a lot of rubbish, and I think if you don't allow yourself to essentially disconnect with reality, of course, like most films, you're going to think it's utter rubbish. For me as well, what was interesting is 1999 was the beginning, if you think about it, where equipment was becoming less and less expensive. I've got a feeling that that's when I maybe started to have ambitions to get into film productions and video production with more gusto than ever before. But also 1999, the internet was a very, very different place. I mean, people still used Yahoo and Lycos and Ask Jeeves. So I think we need to remember that as an achievement, to create maybe one of the first viral campaign when it comes to an indie film.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was, wasn't it? It was the first internet. It was the first indie type success of found footage film, and it was genuinely the first film that went viral on the internet, where the internet was actually an integral part of what made it successful.
Absolutely. So let's explore that. So we know that using the chronology again, historically, the official website was launched in June 1999. As a reminder, no one saw the film before the June 98, I beg your pardon, Roger, for the website. Yeah. The film premiered to a small audience in January 1999. So there was a lag, and during which time, almost like someone would do for a role-playing game type things, they created a website with essentially content that was fictional, but that looked very real. You know, they had that kind of newsreel style for interviews using kind of handheld camera. They had a chronology of the legend of the witch, which was, of course, completely made up, and so on and so forth. But when they obviously went for the premiere at the Sundance Film Festival, they had flyers given to the audience asking people if you found missing or deceased, actors, please let us know.
Yeah, and fascinating. I mean, newsreel style interviews and police reports and stuff like that. But giving out the flyers, I mean, I wonder whether anybody was genuinely taken in by this and actually thought, you know, there are genuinely 4 people out there missing. I wonder whether it actually resulted in any sightings and people actually ringing the police up and say, you know, those 4 kids that are missing, I think I've just seen them in the woods over there. Possibly a little bit of a Orson Welles' War of the Worlds moment going on there, where fact and fiction might just get a little bit blurred.
It was close to the edge, and certainly for the first year of the film being released in 1999, I would say, if you went on IMDb, according to Movie Historian, the actors were listed as missing or presumed dead.
Again, it was all part of the narrative, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All part of and the same thing about the website. Materials of the actors who were the police and investigators giving testimony, casework, childhood photographs of the actors, and it was so well planned, really, and so much more than just a film.
And that almost puts to shame blockbusters that we were aware of. I mean, it has some. Do you remember when we reviewed The Martian, and we spoke about how they actually had some fake logs from the astronauts and so on? There's some echo of that, but I just love again the cheekiness of typical indie filmmakers to try and find ways to make the headlines. And of course, the moment newspapers caught on to the story, that was it. And that's when the distributors came in. But we know that the people at Burkittsville were not, they were split. People owning restaurants and the likes were very pleased to see all the people turning up to either try and pretend they were looking for the missing kind of filmmakers, or indeed just to have, I don't know if they're selfies in 99, but there were some split kind of views on that. And I did wonder whether, did it help for them to use a real town, or would it have been wiser to actually use a fictional name for the town? Because I'm sure the locals were not impressed to see all those kind of nerdies, turning up.
Yeah, and coming back to the documentary, which was obviously released before the film, I think they call it a mockumentary, don't they? Because it was all a documentary based upon fictional events. But that, for me, was the genius. I always think of Blair Witch Project as the documentary and the film. It was never ever just the film for me. They went hand in hand, and you had to watch the documentary in advance of watching the film.
I agree, and for me, it's also the story. So the film is finished and is shown in January 1999. It's just taking time. It's just going through it, and then it's picked up by Artisan Entertainment and a few other big guns. And then in July 1999, so literally 6-7 months later, The Curse of the Blair Witch Project is released on Sci-Fi Channel and then goes completely viral, I think you can use the term, which means that then the producers and, of course, the investors are happy to re-release the film in the US in the summer of 1999, and then we'll get it in the UK in October. So that movie had an entire year of visibility. Do you mean normally blockbusters, they need to make money at the first weekend or two, and then eventually it just dies off. And in this case, essentially people talk about the Blair Witch Project for the entire year.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that they did a remake of this film quite recently, and I can't honestly say that it added anything to me from the original experience, and they certainly couldn't replicate and didn't even try to replicate any of the build-up and any of the documentary, for example, and all the content that went with the original film, which made me think, why bother? Why bother?
Do you know what was interesting? So I saw you could call it the official sequel to the Blair Witch Project, which was okay because it gave you more insight into the witch itself, the entity. But I think the first one was so good because you had no clue. And the other thing that I think worked well with the first film is, of course, this iconic kind of stickman figure that they use as part of most identity of sort, but also it was featured by dangling on the trees and so on, with this kind of very strange stickman figure that they used. That was part and parcel, I think, the language of the film.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's an iconic logo. It's an iconic logo. So we've got a good example not only of content, but of branding as well.
So you're saying that people are spending all that money on logo, they should just sticks together.
Sticks together. Something, well, keep it simple, Pascal. You know what I always say about keeping things simple.
So I feel like watching this film again. I've not seen the Blair Witch Project for quite some time because I would argue I remember it so well. But also maybe to your point, Roger, I'm thinking, do you know what? There's nothing like the first time. The first time on the big screen you see this film till the very end, you kind of go, my goodness, what have I just seen? But it'd be lovely now that we've reviewed it in some fashion and to spoke about marketing. It'd be lovely to go back. And like all films, it's had its kind of release in DVDs and Blu-rays and so on. I'm told there is a special edition with an extra 7 minutes of found footage, whether that's going to make a big difference. But I think you're right. Is the way to watch this, to your point, watch The Curse of the Blair Witch Project first, the mockumentary, and then immerse yourself into the story itself of the Blair Witch Project.
I think that's absolutely the way to do it. And the mockumentary is on the DVD and the Blu-ray as well.
Smashing. Well, viewers, listeners, you have your homework for this weekend. Have you seen the Blair Witch Project? Have we missed any of the marketing genius moments from this, the most successful indie films of all time? Do let us know. Roger Edwards, thank you so much for joining me for episode 27 of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. It's been a pleasure to go through the 6 segments with you, as always. To our viewers and listeners, please let us know how we can add to those segments. Do send your suggestions in terms of content to review, apps to comment on, and of course, films to add to film marketing segment. Until next time, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni, and he was Roger Edwards. Take care now.